Hey, it's Joe Farrow with Geek Toolkit, and this is Aerith, a 3D print that I did of Aerith in the Lifestream from Final Fantasy VII. And in this video, I want to go over all of the things I learned on how to make this. Everything from some painting tips I have, to how to get the electronics in here, to some stuff about the 3D print on settings and such. Let's start with the 3D print portion. Now, this is a two-part 3D print design off of my mini factory that I'll link to in the description. And the model here, Aerith, I did at a 0.12 layer height on an Ender 3 Pro. The Lifestream itself, I did at a 0.2 layer height, but I used a translucent filament, and I used PLA for this. This is the first tip, and this is why it's important. This is what I used, and I don't think it really matters necessarily the brand, but you want something that's translucent, not transparent. If it's transparent, it's going to try to look like glass. It's going to try to be completely see-through. Translucent is something that's a bit more foggy, and what happens is it diffuses the light and gives you this effect here. So that's the first tip, is you want a translucent PLA. The other thing is, when you print this, you're going to want it to be hollow. You can see each of these life streams are actually hollow, but the base here is not hollow. The base needs to be solid, and it needs to have supports here. So if you want to print with supports in the middle and not on the outside, on Cura, I used a feature called support blocking. It works very simply. You place boxes over each of the areas that you don't want supports, and you extend them out till they cover them. And then when you print, you won't have supports in these verticals here, but you will where you need them. Making sure this is support free means that it's going to be open, but the bottom of your print will still be solid. So another trick I used to really open these up is I used a soldering iron. I just melted away holes under here. It was very quick, took a few seconds. I wiped my soldering head off, and it provided me the ability to put these lights in. These lights are referred to as fairy lights. Fairy lights are just these tiny LEDs. They're along the wires. And the nice thing about this particular one is it had a controller that's built in. So even though in the video game this is from, they're green, I like the ability to change them. And so as I hit the button, I can cycle through colors. And then after a while, it actually will do a couple of patterns where it'll switch through colors, or it will do things like breathing where it'll come in and out. I wanted that ability. I just thought that was really cool, and it wasn't that much more expensive for these LEDs versus single color. So these were about $12 US for these. And the way they're stuffed in here is I started at one end, I went all the way in to the next one, and when I got around to the end, I went back and just kept stuffing LEDs in until it were all used up and stuffed in there. Moving on to the character herself. This was my first print, my first paint job, and I really made a bunch of mistakes here. The first thing is I didn't sand the model down near enough. I used a 220 grit sandpaper. This right here is a 600 grit sandpaper, and I definitely wanted to start with the 220 to work the model down, but going to a 600 and getting it afterwards really got it a lot smoother for this one here. The other thing is I used a paint and primer as a base coat because that's what I had available. I didn't understand that if you have a paint and primer, it does the priming, but it also does a paint layer. So when you're painting on top of that, you're painting on top of a paint layer, and that was an absolute nightmare. I ended up having to go over it again, and I ended up using a Rust-Oleum primer, which was recommended. This worked fine, except for now at this point, I've got primer with paint and then primer on top of it. I really didn't give myself a good shot. For this model here where I was successful, I used a Citadel gray primer. It was expensive. It was a $20 can. There's probably better paints and better primers out there. I'm not great at painting. I'm literally showing you my first and second attempt and trying to tell you what I did differently to get to the second one. But I do know that in the future I will try to use a primer that is meant for painting miniatures and meant for these paints. I seem to have a lot more success with it. The other thing is sanding the model down, priming it, then sanding it again if need be. I think that's important to kind of get to the consistency, because the primer revealed a bunch of imperfections in the model that I just wasn't ready for. The next thing is I switched from, I had these really generic paints, and I was trying to do the pink on the bottom here. And the way I tried to do pink is I started with red and added white. Really what I should have did is added white and added red, and that got me a much better pink on the bottom here. It's a bit stained, and I'll talk about that in a second, but this pink came out a lot more of what I wanted. I combined the cheap acrylic paints that I got off of Amazon for about 20 bucks with some of these Citadel paints that were $4 or $5 each. This one here is a gold that was a special effect I wanted for her bracelets and her necklace, and also the buttons on her jacket to stand out. This one was a skin tone that worked a lot better than the skin tone I had here that was just kind of gloopy. And finally, this is a Korean red for the jacket. It was a bit darker than I wanted. I wanted a little bit brighter, but it came out really well. Now, the other thing I did on this is the browns for her hair. I did multiple layers. I did a watered down base layer, and then I did a less watered down, thicker layer on top to give it a little bit of a depth to it. And then I did a wash. I basically created my own wash by putting black paint and water, and then kind of painting that over her and then wiping it down. That ended up staining her dress, and I'll probably in the future go over the dress one more time to get it back to clean. But right now, I kind of like the dirty look because it darkened up her jacket. It really gave it some depth. And then her hair, I thought, came out really, really well. The biggest thing I learned with painting the acrylics on here, after talking with a gentleman over at Uncle's Games here, is watering down my acrylics really, really helped. I did thin, light layers and did multiple ones of them to build up, instead of trying to get everything on at once and get a really bright color right off the bat. And I think I was just a lot more successful with that, and things like her skin tone worked out really well. The other thing was just the order. I started out with her skin and the lighter colors, and then did her jacket on this one. On this one here, I had a really hard time because I did her skin last, and I got some of her hair on her skin, some of her skin on her hair, and going from that light brown to light skin tone back and forth was just not really successful. So keep in mind what order you're going to go in. I recommend for coloring, start with the skin layers and then the lighter layers, and then work your way up. And the one thing I found is if you water down the paint and you do have something splotch over, wipe it off immediately and it will clean off. On this one here, I wasn't keeping things clean, and I ended up with blotches of paint that I was going back and forth trying to correct. So that was a big paint tip for me. I hope that was helpful, and I hope you really enjoyed this model. I'll put a link to the model and everything in the comments. I think it was just a really, really cool project, and so I just wanted to show it off, and hopefully if others make it, this will help make it easier for you. Sometimes just being aware that a project's out there is the most important thing. Really appreciate watching the videos, appreciate the comments, and if you subscribe, my next few videos are probably going to be home automation based, and then I'll get back into projects again here shortly. So thanks for all the watching, the comments, and the likes. I'll talk to you soon. I'm Joe Farrow with Geek Toolkit.